years ago, NASA destroyed hundreds of Apollo-era tapes found in the basement of a deceased Pennsylvania man's home. 2 massive computers were also found in the basement, though NASA claimed the serial number imprinted on them didn't match anything on its records. A NASA FOIA request. In response to a FOIA request from Motherboard, NASA's Office of Inspector General released a report detailing an investigation into a trove of data reels found in the basement of a former IBM engineer. The engineer, whose name was redacted in the report, had worked as a NASA contractor and was given permission to take the tapes as well as 2 large computers sometime between 1968 and 1972. According to his widow, the IBM Center in Pittsburgh gave him permission to take the materials. The man's widow expressly stated, "Please tell NASA these items were not stolen." Upon receiving custody of the tapes, a NASA inspector decided that there was no use for them, as they were moderately to severely damaged by mold. The tapes, many of which were unlabeled, appeared to be from the Pioneer and Helios missions. The Pioneer missions sent probes to study Jupiter and Saturn, while Helios probes were sent to study the Sun. The inspector broke down the number of reels per mission. PN8, Pioneer 8, 1 reel. PN9, Pioneer 9, 2 reels. PN10, Pioneer 10, 40 reels. PN11, Pioneer 11, 53 reels. HEL 1 or HEL A, Helios 1, 10 reels. HESA, possibly an abbreviation for Helios A, 2 reels. Intelsat 4, 2 reels. NASA destroys tapes. The labeled reels accounted for just over 100 of the 325 tapes. After conferring with NASA's archive department, the inspector deemed them historically insignificant and recommended they be destroyed. But the correspondence between the inspector and his NASA colleagues revealed some strange findings that were left unexplained. One discrepancy was found with a tape seeming to be labeled from the Pioneer 11 mission, which launched in 1973. However, the date on the tape was marked 1972. The computers found in the basement presented another enigma, as they were incredibly heavy and labeled with a contract serial number that NASA had no record of ever having. The numbers read NAS5 2154 and NAS5 176205, initially bringing up a contract number for an HVAC system. Even stranger, the contract duration for one of the computers found in the NASA archives was from 2003 to 2004 for a computer number inscription from 1962. This quandary led one NASA employee to state, "It really feels like archaeology to me." NASA said that it had no use for the computers and they could be used for scrap or disposed of by whatever means. The computers themselves were said to be extraordinarily heavy, likely requiring a crane to move them, yet somehow they ended up in the basement of this man's house. Though these tapes are unrelated to the Apollo missions, they are relevant when considering NASA's archival preservation methods at the time. One would be remiss not to remember the degaussing or erasing of over 200,000 magnetic tapes, in which one with the original footage of the moon landing in 1969 was lost. Motherboard pointed out that NASA's abysmal archival process has been known and chastised by the government in the past. For the Pioneer 10 and 11 missions contained in this recent trove of basement tapes, only 30 to 59% of the mission data was archived at the Goddard National Space Science Data Center. NASA considers this to be a good level of documentation. Motherboard confirmed that the tapes were disposed of and recycled by NASA. It will remain a mystery as to what exactly was contained on the tapes, though NASA employees say they were likely blank. It is surprising, however, that NASA would allow a private contractor to take home that many magnetic data reels when it was making such an effort to save money by erasing and recycling them, including the one containing the moon landing. Was this unnamed engineer who held onto the tapes for over 40 years really just a collector? Another set of mysterious fast radio bursts, FRBs, from a distant galaxy were recorded by astronomers at the Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Management Experiment, CHIME, in British Columbia. Scientists are still unsure of the source of these strange bursts, though one potential explanation posits that they may be the product of an advanced alien civilization. The latent bursts are the first recorded from this source since it was accidentally discovered in 2007. Astronomers remained baffled by this latest recording, which details signals at a significantly lower frequency than their first discovery. Initial frequencies clocked in at 1400 MHz, but the latest bursts came in at around 400 MHz, the lowest possible frequency their instruments could detect. Is this potential alien civilization sending signals at varying ranges to increase its chances of being heard? If so, it seems we're picking up all of them. Their latest discovery was published in the journal Nature. Though they were first discovered in 2007, speculation around the FRB's origin didn't captivate headlines as much as it did in 2017 when Professor Alvy Loeb of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics published a paper suggesting the alien possibility. Fast radio bursts are exceedingly bright given their short duration and origin at great distances, and we haven't identified a possible natural source with any confidence, Loeb said. An artificial origin is worth contemplating and checking. There are two competing theories on the extraterrestrial potential, the first being that a civilization is transmitting their calling card in hopes of contacting another civilization like ourselves. The other possibility is that the bursts are propelling the sails of alien probes in deep space, a type of technology the Breakthrough Initiative is currently attempting to develop. Astronomers notice that whatever the source of these waves may be, it's scattering the radio bursts, meaning it must be a massive object with special characteristics. That could mean in some sort of dense clump like a supernova, remnant, or the near central black hole in a galaxy, said a team member in the study from the University of Toronto. But it has to be in some special place to give us all the scattering that we see. In the event that these bursts are coming from an alien megastructure, their source would likely have to be at least the size of a planet, unless they're being emitted by some technology we can't yet fathom. This would surely put the civilization beyond level 1 on the Kardashev scale, a level in which they have been able to harness all the energy of their home planet. We, on the other hand, have yet to reach such advancement. Could this latest discovery mean that we're on the precipice of making contact with an advanced extraterrestrial civilization? It might be time to start building an intergalactic radio broadcaster of our own. While the Sun has proven her superiority, it is the Moon that the species of Earth sincerely like to confide in. That's why she's a major aesthetical inspiration for mankind, while the creatures of the wild instinctively howl at her mesmerizing aura, which only strengthens her mysterious nature. However, despite such spiritual adornments, the Moon, since her creation 4.5 billion years ago, has given away very little about her dark side. What many are not aware of is that there are two sides of the Moon, and the tidal forces between Earth and Moon have slowed down the latter's rotation in such a way that the same side of the Moon is always facing the Earth. This synchronous rotation of the Moon, rotating on her axis in about the same time that it takes her to orbit the Earth, keeps a particular side of the lunar hemisphere permanently turned away from Earth at all times. The side of the Moon that Earthlings can see is called the near side, and the opposite side, which is never visible in its entirety from Earth, is also known as the far side of the Moon, and rather popularly, the dark side of the Moon. For thousands of years, humankind's curiosity towards this dark side eventually led to the exploration where this mystifying far hemisphere of the Moon was first photographed by the Soviet probe Lunar 3 in 1959, and directly observed by the human eye during the orbital mission of Apollo 8. The official verdict was that the far side is the same as the near side, covered with craters and highlands. But rumor has it that there's an alien base on the far side of the Moon. Many would doubt this because by now almost everyone has seen the photographs of both sides of the moon taken so nicely by the Western satellite probes, and evidently their information showed no signs of life or intelligent structures on the surface of the moon. But before all of this, since the time Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon on July the 21st, 1969, there was speculation that during their stay on the moon's surface, the crew of Apollo 11 was never all by themselves. The following conversation between Apollo 11 and NASA Mission Control that took place still mystifies people to date. Apollo 11, Armstrong and Aldrin.
What was it? What the hell was it? That's all I want to know. These babies were huge, sir. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it.
What? What the hell's going on?
They're here, under the surface. What's there? Mission Control calling Apollo 11. Roger, we're here, all three of us, but we've found some visitors. They've been here for quite a while, judging by the installations. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out there. They're lined up in ranks on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon, watching us.
According to noted Russian ufologist and professor of mathematics at Moscow University, Dr. Vladimir Azaza, this encounter took place shortly after the landing of the Apollo 11, but the report of this encounter was never heard by the public as NASA censored it. According to Otto Binder, a former NASA employee, amateur radio enthusiasts on a classified channel reserved for high-security messages overheard the conversation. In 1979, Maurice Chantelane, NASA's communications expert, who also helped design Apollo spacecrafts, publicly stated that the encounter between Apollo 11 and the UFOs was common knowledge within NASA. One might wonder what Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had to say about all this. Both of them publicly admitted later in life that they did encounter UFOs on the moon, and Armstrong, the first human to walk on the moon, said during a NASA symposium their ships were far superior to ours, both in size and technology. Boy, they were big and menacing. He went on to say that there is indeed an alien base on the moon. Another former NASA astronaut and fifth man to walk on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14, in a radio interview in 2008, admitted to the existence of alien life forms, describing the beings as little people who look strange to us, and, in his own words, "I happen to have been privileged enough to be in on the fact that we've been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomena is real." While NASA has seemingly given up on its plans to send humans back to the surface of the moon anytime soon, a contractor is proposing a mission to send a crew to a stationary spot in orbit over the far side of Earth's neighbor. Lockheed Martin has begun pitching an L2 farside mission using its Orion spacecraft under development. It is seen as an intermediate step towards more challenging missions beyond low Earth orbit. Using the latest technology, an astronaut crew would teleoperate robots on the lunar surface. Lockheed Martin says such an endeavor could sharpen skills and technologies needed for a trip to an asteroid, as well as showcase techniques useful for exploring Mars by teleoperation as astronauts orbit the red planet. Both are stated goals under the new direction for NASA outlined by the former President Obama. In February 2010, the White House issued its proposed NASA budget that aced out former President George W. Bush's Constellation program. That plan had benchmarked 2020 as the date to replant the feet of US astronauts on the moon after the last set of moonwalkers departed the landscape back in 1972. Instead, former President Obama laid out the goal of sending astronauts beyond the moon and into deep space. He aimed to land people on an asteroid for the first time in history by 2025 and send a crew to Mars by the mid-2030s. Space planners at Lockheed Martin Space Systems in Denver proposed using their Orion capsule to support an L2 farside moon mission, one that allows an astronaut crew to have continuous line-of-sight visibility to both the entire far side of the moon and Earth. The crew members aboard NASA's Apollo 8 mission in 1968 were the first to set human eyes on that hidden real estate permanently turned away from the Earth. The Earth-Moon L2 Lagrange point is where the combined gravity of the Earth and the Moon allow a spacecraft to hover over one spot and be synchronized with the Moon in its orbit around the Earth. From a halo orbit around that L2 point, a crew would control robots on the lunar surface. Teleoperated science tasks include snagging rock specimens for return to Earth from the Moon's South Pole Aitken Basin, one of the largest, deepest and oldest craters in the solar system, as well as deploy a radio telescope array on the far side. We have come up with a sequence of missions that we've named Stepping Stones, which begins with flights in low Earth orbit and incrementally builds towards a human mission to the moons of Mars in the 2030s. The first Orion missions to the Moon's far side, viewed as feasible by 2016 to 2018, never took place. Its plan was to accomplish science goals on the lunar surface using robotic rovers controlled by astronauts in space, as practice for doing the same thing at Mars, Hopkins told Space.com. The citizens of the world have sat patiently waiting for the mission to initiate, but what came back from NASA and contractors was more silent than space itself. Many await explanations why lunar exploration came to a halt and why it is seemingly more difficult to do now what was achieved by NASA back in the 1960s. The far side of the Moon is forever hidden from the naked eye on Earth, but now scientists have developed a simple way to describe how it looks, and in doing so could shed light on its enigmatic history. The simple mathematical formula they devised explains at least a quarter of the Moon's geography and geology, including the lunar far side's highlands. The near and far sides of the Moon are very different. For instance, elevations on the far side are some 1.2 miles, 1.9 kilometers higher on average, and understanding the roots of those differences could shed light on the mysterious early days of the Moon. Researchers discovered the formula while analyzing sets of lunar topography and gravity data. The stretch of the Moon's far side surface, explained by the new formula, has to be the oldest lunar feature seen yet, since it lies beneath the ancient South Pole Aitken Basin. The mathematics of it is similar to what applies to Jupiter's tidal effects on its moon Europa. Europa in many ways is different from the Moon, but early on the Moon had a liquid ocean under its crust, and it likely shares this in common with present-day Europa, Garrick Bethel said. The ocean for the Moon was of liquid rock, not water. Just as the Moon tugs on Earth's oceans, generating tides, so does the Earth pull at the Moon. The researchers suggest that roughly 4.4 billion years ago, when the Moon was less than 100 million years old and its crust floated on an ocean of molten rock, these tidal effects caused distortions that were later frozen in place. People have been thinking about tidal explanations for the large-scale structure and shape of the Moon for the last 100 years, Garrick Bethel said. The new thing here was to look at only one specific region of the Moon that is very old, rather than to test the hypotheses over the Moon as a whole, which was done previously. As a whole, the Moon exhibits a wide range of geologic processes, some young and some old, so I don't think it's fair to explore it as a whole. These findings yield insight into the fundamental process that built the lunar crust. I would like to map out how this terrain may actually extend to other parts of the Moon and encompass even more surface area than we initially reported, he said. He added, the far side of the Moon continues to be a focus of attention, recently after China landed a probe there to conduct experiments. Many have postulated over the idea of the huge amount of money that could be made from mining the lunar ore. However, there are those that say just because we plant an American flag on the Moon does not necessarily mean it's not already owned by something or someone else. NASA's Cassini spacecraft recently ended its 20-year mission to Saturn. It was the first spacecraft to ever orbit the massive gas giant to study the planet's myriad of features, such as its extensive system of rings. These seemingly perfect bands of ice and rock had been photographed before and were thought to be mostly understood by astronomers until Cassini found a rare exception, a glitch on the outer edge of the planet's A-ring. Is Peggy just a moonlet? Launched in 1997, the Cassini spacecraft has always been on a suicide mission, albeit one filled with scientific discovery. That mission lasted just under 20 years, and its final days resulted in some of the most exciting images of the second largest planet in our solar system. The spacecraft discovered 2 new moons, deployed a probe that landed on Titan, and slipped between 2 layers of rings in its orbit. Over its 10-year orbital period, images from Cassini began to show something that has still gone unexplained, a glitch in one of the rings. This glitch was first discovered by a longtime member of the imaging team, Carl Murray, who named it after his mother-in-law Peggy, whose birthday it was. When first imaged in 2013, Peggy was about 1.5 miles wide and imperfect compared to Saturn's otherwise pristine circuits. Because of its tiny size, the Cassini spacecraft was unable to capture it in great detail or within close proximity, but it was enough to recognize its anomalous nature. Murray and his NASA colleagues said they believed Peggy to be either a moon in the making or a moonlet disintegrating as she got smaller during future imaging. Saturn's rings consist of countless particles of ice and rock that orbit within the Roche limit, an area where the planet's gravitational force becomes so strong it rips apart small celestial bodies such as asteroids and meteors. Typically, these particles will coalesce to form moons, but Saturn's pull prevents this, instead maintaining their orbit. These small lunar building blocks are sometimes referred to as moonlets. At first, scientists believed Peggy might have been a full-fledged moon, disrupting the flow of Saturn's orbiting moonlets, but this theory was discounted because they would have expected it to create more chaos. According to NASA, it has been difficult to track Peggy, as she's not always been where they expect her to be. And though scientists believe Peggy may have been an ascent moon at one point, she still remains within the not fully explained category of Saturn's features. Strange features in images from Cassini spacecraft. The Cassini spacecraft gave us quite a bit of new information about Saturn's many moons, including the fact that some of them could potentially support life. The Huygens probe, carried by the Cassini spacecraft, landed on Titan, a moon with a significant amount of surface water. Another of Saturn's moons, Enceladus, is thought to contain vast oceans beneath a layer of ice on its surface. These discoveries have raised the question of whether there is a possibility of life on these moons, as well as some other interesting theories. The most unusual moon in Saturn's orbit is one known as Iapetus. This walnut-shaped satellite has some odd features which some believe are characteristic of an artificial satellite. One half of the moon is bright white, while the other side is dark black, with almost no reflectivity. There is a ridge running along its equator that alternative theorists have likened to 2 independent half-shells welded together. Others have imagined it to possibly be a wall of sorts. Some have pointed out that its odd shape resembles a dodecahedron, evidence of artificial construction compared to the more spherical shape of natural satellites. Further studies of Iapetus' lunar surface shows additional geometric features with lines just a little too straight to be the product of natural mechanisms. David Icke has proposed the idea that Saturn's rings are actually artificial, based largely on a book titled Ringmakers of Saturn. He says he believes that Saturn is a broadcasting system amplifying a frequency that is directly tied to our perception of reality. He points to the similarity between the rings of Saturn and information encoded on a CD or DVD. Icke says he believes this signal is malevolent and is broadcasting a false reality. He says the satellites orbiting Saturn are electromagnetic vehicles creating the rings, and that one can see exhaust being emitted in the process. Icke says he believes Saturn used to be a star like the Sun, but that it is now being used to resonate sound frequencies. There are in fact strange radio signals being broadcast from Saturn, which can be found on NASA's website. Could these eerie tones that sound like something straight out of a horror movie actually have an effect on Earth and our consciousness? Another bizarre discovery on Saturn that has puzzled scientists and alternative theorists alike is the massive hexagonal storm on the planet's north pole. The storm stretches over 20,000 miles wide and reaches down at least 60 miles into the planet's atmosphere. Its distinctly straight sides show how the winds in this gaseous storm shift direction drastically, a phenomenon never observed before. David Wilcock draws the connection between the storm shape and Hans Jenny's discovery of colloidal suspension. Jenny showed the way that sound frequencies create geometric patterns in solutions where particles are suspended in water and gas. Could there be a connection between Icke's theory of Saturn as a frequency transmitter and this massive hexagonal storm on its North Pole? The Mandela Effect: shifts in reality or false memories? The Mandela Effect, sometimes referred to as the Berenstain Bears conspiracy, is a phenomenon in which people report having the same false memories, leading to a belief that something is changing reality. We all experience life through our own subjective lenses, interpreting day-to-day happenings differently than everyone else. This contributes to individuality, free will, and the ability to think for ourselves. But of course, the way we witness our world often results in lapses of memory or perception. We sometimes seem to remember events happening differently than others, or our perception of time is skewed. And individual memory lapses are easily written off when everyone else's memory says otherwise. But how does one explain false memories that are held by a significantly large portion of the population? Confabulation is the psychiatric term for replacing a gap in your memory with a falsification. So what about mass confabulation? Well, that's become a conspiracy of sorts, the Mandela Effect. The Mandela Effect examples, aka the Berenstain Bears conspiracy. The Mandela Effect was given its name by Fiona Broome, who seemed to remember hearing about the death of Nelson Mandela on the news while he was imprisoned in the 1980s. In reality, Mandela survived until late 2013 and did not even become president of South Africa until 1994. But as it turns out, her memory was shared by a deluge of similarly convinced people, resulting in many other instances in which large swathes of the population have claimed to experience the same confabulated memories. Could this be the result of one person incorrectly remembering an historical event or cultural icon, propagating their misinterpretation to be inaccurately remembered by the masses? Or could it be evidence of a multiverse in which waves of events from a parallel universe have washed over into ours, creating subtle nuances in the time-space continuum, where there was once a children's book called The Berenstain Bears instead of the Berenstain Bears? It's more interesting to explore the latter. While the Berenstain Bears is ostensibly a mundane and inconsequential example of the Mandela Effect, there are other instances that are so uncanny they're hard to ignore. For example, when Darth Vader reveals his paternalistic relationship to Luke in Star Wars, most remember him saying, "Luke, I am your father." In reality, he says, "No, I am your father." While an intransigent Star Wars fan might scoff at someone who misquotes such an important scene, it can't be ignored that most people remember it in the former. Even James Earl Jones, who voiced Darth Vader, remembers the line incorrectly. Movie quotes aside, an example of a famous real-life event that has been brought into the mystery of the Mandela Effect regards the famous protester at Tiananmen Square, the Tank Man, whose defiant act of rebellion, standing in front of a tank with grocery bags in hand, is remembered by many as resulting in his death from being run over. In fact, he was not run over, and there is no evidence of it, but many remember his crushing demise distinctly. There is nothing new to those familiar with the theory, and there are many other examples that support it, so many that there is an entire subreddit devoted to the effect, with topics ranging from movies that never existed to discrepancies in historical events. People vehemently claim to remember very particular things differently, but on a large collective scale. Some people's reactions are visceral when they experience new revelations due to the Mandela Effect, to the point of incurring panic attacks or questioning reality. Mandela Effect theories and CERN. One pragmatist theory for explaining the Mandela Effect is that it is simply a failure in collective memory. Our brains are very easily influenced by our own filters, as well as the perception of others. Many common instances of the Mandela Effect are trivial and maybe just went unnoticed in the past, or are the result of conclusions that our brains jump to based on the context of an image or video. but some are substantial, like an entire country hundreds of miles out of place. One of the more intriguing theories that attempts to explain this phenomenon points a finger at CERN and the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland. CERN's experiments are intended to find illusory particles that could potentially show evidence of a multiverse, creating tiny black holes or discover dark matter. While all of this sounds very exciting, it also sounds potentially dangerous. What could possibly go wrong if we opened up a black hole in Europe or tapped into another dimension with consequences unknown? While the scientists at CERN assure us their experiments are conducted on such a controlled, small scale as to have little, if any, negative consequences, some believe that their meddling in quantum fields has led to some strange effects, resulting in some kind of interdimensional entanglement. One of the quantum particles that CERN has been searching for is the graviton. These elusive particles correspond with how gravity would react between different dimensions and are still only hypothetical, but the way CERN describes them is intriguing. If gravitons exist, it should be possible to create them at the LHC, but they would rapidly disappear into extra dimensions. Collisions in particle accelerators always create balanced events, just like fireworks, with particles flying out in all directions. A graviton might escape our detectors, leaving an empty zone that we notice as an imbalance in momentum and energy in the event. We would need to carefully study the properties of the missing object to work out whether it is a graviton escaping to another dimension or something else. Is CERN inducing these gravitons, creating holes to other dimensions and swapping idiosyncrasies in our world? Or are we just having a collective memory lapse? Former NASA employee Ken Johnston recently released a series of doctored images to prove that NASA had manipulated photographs to conceal unexplained structures and anomalies on the lunar surface. He asserts that NASA knows that astronauts discovered ancient alien cities on the moon and is covering up this amazing discovery. Johnston's claims. Ken Johnston, Sr. is a retired aerospace worker, ex-US Marine cadet, and most recently acclaimed NASA whistleblower. In 1971, Johnston was a consultant employed by Brown and Root in the Lunar Receiving Laboratory of the NASA Johnson Center. His job involved storing, curating, and cataloging Apollo images and moon rocks, as well as packaging and shipping lunar samples and photographs to various science labs. This work meant that he had in his office numerous sets of photographs taken by Apollo astronauts with their chest-mounted Hasselblad cameras. It was during his work with Brown and Root that Johnson claims that he saw NASA photo technicians doctoring lunar photos taken during Apollo missions to hide UFOs, unexplained structures, and anomalies on the moon's surface. When the program was ending, Johnston was told by his boss, Bud Laskower, to destroy what remained of the photo archive, but instead he kept one set of photographs without telling anyone. In 1995, Johnston met Richard Hoagland, American author and conspiracy theorist, at one of Hoagland's lectures, and the next day showed him his collection of lunar photos. Hoagland scanned the images on his scanner, then adjusted the results in Photoshop. It was then that he was able to make out strange marks and scratches on some of the scans, which he believed were anomalies on the lunar surface. Hoagland was extremely impressed, to say the least. In his 2007 book, Dark Mission: The Secret History of NASA, he wrote, "In scanning Ken's priceless Apollo 14 C prints, discovered that the computer could see what the human eye could not. Incredible geometric detail in the pitch-black areas, like the lunar sky. The sensitivity of modern CCD imaging technology, in even commercially available image scanners, coupled with the amazing enhancements capabilities of state-of-the-art commercial software like Adobe's Photoshop, allowed the invisible detail buried in these supposedly black layers of these 30-year-old emulsions to ultimately be revealed. A democratization of technology that no censor at NASA could have possibly foreseen over more than 30 years ago." In June 2016, Johnson announced in a press release that he was donating some of these photographs and research material to Roswell's International UFO Museum and Research Center. The photos apparently showed lunar bases, satellite dishes, and other anomalies that are not seen on the glossy NASA photo archives. Johnston's almost complete set of first-generation copies of 10x8 glossy photographs from the Apollo program are alleged by him to show evidence of a lunar civilization that has since been removed from the official versions that are available to anyone both online and as photo prints. In 2018, Ken Johnston published a book about his lunar photos and research, Ken's Moon, revealing the dark mission of NASA. The blurb for the book sums up Johnston's career as a NASA whistleblower. It says, "The story of Ken Johnston's archive of historic NASA photos and his decision to go public with evidence of the manipulation of those images from the Apollo moon missions is the stuff of legend in the alternative history community." At the Lunar Receiving Laboratory, Ken was the director of the Data and Photo Control Department, responsible for all photographs and the data generated by the contributing scientists from around the world. He also produced and edited the NASA Lunar Sample Information Catalog for each of the lunar landing missions. One day, Ken enters the room where he sees strange activity. Given that he feels a sense of responsibility for the integrity of the NASA collection, he inquires as to what is going on. He spoke with several people who called themselves strippers because they were stripping out details in lunar images that might be hard to explain. That day, they were at the task of painting out the stars in particular lunar images. He also found out that smudging out anomalies on images was commonplace. Ken's story could be counted as a minority report in NASA's branded paranorma of American heroics. The US government and the American people had allocated significant financial and other resources towards the goal of reaching the moon at the behest of our young President Kennedy. The idea was to see what was there, to share that information with the world, and elevate the knowledge to mankind. To discover that the artifacts of that effort might have been manipulated was highly disappointing. It is this scenario being asserted by Ken Johnston, the very human being who at one time had watched over the chain of evidence. In May 2018, Johnston's second book was published, Regression of a NASA Whistleblower, Selections from a Regression Session with Commentary. Much of this work consists of material gained from Johnston in a hypnotic regression session conducted by Sasha and Janet Lessin in Scottsdale, Arizona in 2016. Problems in India. In a February 2017 interview with the New Indian Express, Johnston answered various questions regarding aliens and UFOs. In answer to the question how he had managed to get first-hand information about extraterrestrials, Johnston said, "Once we were done with the first 3 missions, I was put in charge of photographing and documenting their exact location. One day, my boss ordered me to destroy these images. I reminded him that the government had paid for them and that they should be made public, to which he replied, 'No, get rid of it. I don't care what you think.' There were elements in the pictures that were unexplainable. You can now download them for free from my website," he says. "You can see the lunar anomalies too. It looks like something has been smudged out. Way before Photoshop, they would paint things out. Once, when I walked into the photo lab, I saw a woman painting something out. She called herself a stripper and said that she was paid for it. He said, this really upset me as I was in charge of keeping a record of things. I guess that's why they call me a whistleblower." On the 12th of February 2017, the Hindu Times ran the headline, "NASA Astronaut Visits B.M. Birla Science Center." The NASA astronaut turned out to be none other than Ken Johnston, whom the newspaper described as a test astronaut who is also chief trainer at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, of the United States of America. The problem is, of course, that Johnston was never an astronaut and never a chief trainer of anyone. NASA soon found out about the imposter and informed the State Department that someone was in India posing as an astronaut and chief trainer at NASA. Within days, Johnston was asked to leave the country. In December 2015, another NASA whistleblower with similar stories to Johnston's hit the tabloid headlines, this time claiming that there were 3 flying saucers on the moon during one of the NASA lunar landings, but the whole episode had been covered up. A woman named Donna Hare claimed to have worked for computer and engineer contractor Philco Ford during the early 1970s in NASA's photo labs. She claimed to have had high level of security clearance and was thus able to access part of the building's headquarters known as Building 8, which gave her contact with a series of high-ranking officials who leaked her information in secret over lunch. Apparently, Hare was informed by sources that during one of the moon landings, astronauts had discovered 3 UFOs had landed there when they touched down. She claimed that one of her contacts had worked in a quarantine area where astronauts were debriefed after they returned home. She said, "This man was in quarantine with them and was part of their debriefing. He said a lot of them talked about their experience of the crafts following them." Philco Ford was an important contractor in the days of Apollo and afterwards as Ford Aerospace in the shuttle era. Hare also claimed that she was involved with photo processing of Philco Ford's work, some of which showed strange anomalies on the moon. Someone also informed her that there was a special room where photography experts airbrushed UFOs and other unexplained artifacts out of pictures. On another occasion, Hare was informed that UFOs had been responsible for crippling the Apollo 13 spacecraft in order to prevent it from reaching its intended landing area on the far side of the moon. Hare has, however, produced no proof to support any of her claims. One wonders what the real goal of such whistleblowers as Johnston is. Do they genuinely possess secret information that they wish to make public, whatever the cost? Are they only in it for the fame and money? Or are they being guided by darker forces with a hidden agenda which we can only guess at?
Despite 6 announced visits by United States astronauts between 1969 and 1972, the Moon remains a riddle to scientists in many regards. The solution to this riddle could indicate an alien aspect of our familiar Moon. Dr. Robert Jastrow, the first chairman of NASA's Lunar Exploration Committee, called the Moon the Rosetta Stone of the planets. Scientists had hoped that by studying the composition of the Moon, they would resolve some of the mysteries of how our planet and solar system came into existence. However, 6 moon landings later, science writer Earl Ubel declared, "The lunar Rosetta Stone remains a mystery." The Moon is more complicated than anyone expected. It is not simply a kind of billiard ball frozen in space and time, as many scientists had believed. Few of the fundamental questions have been answered, but the Apollo rocks and recordings have spawned a score of mysteries. A few breath-stopping mysteries, or anomalies, as scientists prefer to call them, is the fact that the Moon is far older than previously imagined, perhaps even much older than the Earth and the Sun. By examining tracks burned into moon rocks by cosmic rays, scientists have dated the rocks as billions of years old. Some as far back as 4.5 billion years, far older than the Earth, and nearly as old as the solar system. The Moon has at least 3 distinct layers of rocks. Contrary to the idea that heavier objects sink, the heavier rocks are found on the surface, and there is a definite disparity in the distribution of minerals. If the Earth and Moon were created at the same time, near each other, why has one body, the Earth, got all the iron, gold, etc., and the other, the Moon, not much? The differences suggest that Earth and Moon came into being far away from each other, an idea that stumbles over the inability of astrophysicists to explain how exactly the Moon became a satellite of Earth. The Moon is extremely dry and does not appear ever to have had water in any substantial amounts. None of the moon rocks, regardless of where they were found, contained free water or even water molecules bound into the minerals. Yet Apollo 16 astronauts found moon rocks that contained bits of rusted iron. Since oxidation requires oxygen and free hydrogen, this rust indicates there must be water somewhere on the Moon. Furthermore, instruments left behind by Apollo missions sent a signal to Earth on the 7th of March 1971 indicating that a wind of water had crossed the Moon's surface. Since any water on the airless Moon's surface vaporizes and behaves like the wind on Earth, the question became, where did this water originate? The vapor cloud eruptions lasted 14 hours, and covered an area of some 100 square miles, prompting Rice University physicists Dr. John Freeman Jr. and Dr. H. Ken Hills to pronounce the event one of the most exciting discoveries yet indicating water within the Moon. The two physicists claimed that the water vapour came from deep inside the Moon, apparently released during a moonquake. NASA officials offered a more mundane and questionable explanation. They speculated that two tanks on Apollo descent stages containing between 27 and 45 kilograms of water became stressed and ruptured, releasing their contents. Freeman and Hills declined to accept this explanation, pointing out that the two tanks from Apollo 12 and 14 were some 180 kilometers apart, yet the water vapor was detected with the same flux at both sites, although the instruments faced in opposite directions. Skeptics also have understandably questioned the odds of two separate tanks breaking simultaneously and how such a small quantity of water could produce 100 square miles of vapor. Moon rocks were found to be magnetized, not strong enough to pick up a paperclip, but magnetic nevertheless. Yet there is no magnetic field on the Moon itself. So where did the magnetism come from? The presence of large seas of smooth, solidified molten rock also presented a mystery. These indicate nothing less than a vast outpouring of lava at some distant time. It has now been confirmed that some of the Moon's craters are of internal origin, yet there is no indication that the Moon has ever been hot enough to produce volcanic eruptions. Another puzzle is that almost all 4/5 of the areas are located on the Moon's Earth-side hemisphere. Yet the far side contains many more craters and mountainous areas. Between 1969 and 1977, Apollo mission seismographic equipment registered up to 3,000 moonquakes in each year of operation. Most of the vibrations were quite small and were caused by meteorite strikes or falling booster rockets, but many other quakes were detected deep inside the Moon. This internal creaking is believed to be caused by the gravitational pull of our planet, as most moonquakes occur when the Moon is closest to the Earth. An event occurred in 1958 in the Moon's Alphonsus crater, which shook the idea that all internal moonquake activity is simply settling rocks. In November of that year, astronomer Nikolai A. Kozyrev of the Crimean Astrophysical Observatory startled the scientific world by photographing the first recorded gaseous eruption on the Moon near the crater's peak. Kozyrev attributed this to escaping fluorescent gases. He also detected a reddish glow characteristic of carbon compounds, which seemed to move and disappeared after an hour. Some scientists refused to accept Kozyrev's findings until astronomers at the Lowell Observatory in 1963 saw reddish glows on the crests of ridges in the Aristarchus region. Days later, two separate observatories reported coloured lights on the Moon lasting more than an hour. Something was going on inside the volcanically dead Moon, and whatever it is, it occurs the same way at the same time. It seems apparent that the Moon has a tough, hard outer shell and a light or non-existent interior. The Moon's shell contains dense minerals such as titanium, used on Earth in the construction of aircraft and space vehicles. Many people still recall watching our astronauts on TV as they vainly tried to drill through the crust of a Moon Mera. Their specifically designed drills could only penetrate a few inches. The puzzle of the Moon's hard surface was compounded by the discovery of what appeared to be processed metals. Experts were surprised to find lunar rocks bearing brass, mica, and amphibole, in addition to near-pure titanium, uranium-236 and neptunium-237, elements not previously found in nature, were discovered in Moon rocks, according to the Argonne National Laboratory. Undoubtedly the greatest mystery concerning our Moon is how it came to be there in the first place. Prior to the Apollo missions, one serious theory as to the Moon's origin was that it broke off the Earth eons ago. Although no one could positively locate where on Earth it originated, many speculated that the loss of material explained the huge gouge in the Earth which forms the Pacific Ocean. However, this idea was discarded when it was found that there is little similarity between the composition of our world and that of the Moon. A more recent theory had the Moon created out of space debris left over from the creation of the Earth. This concept proved untenable in light of current gravitational theory, which indicates that one large object will accumulate all loose material, leaving none for the formation of another large body. It is now generally accepted that the Moon originated elsewhere and entered the Earth's gravitational field at some point in the distant past. Here theories diverge. One states that the Moon was originally a planet which collided with the Earth, creating debris which combined to form the Moon, and another states that the Moon, while wandering through our solar system, was captured and pulled into orbit by the Earth's gravity. Neither of these theories is especially compelling, because of the lack of evidence that neither the Earth nor the Moon seems to have been physically disrupted by a past close encounter. There is no debris in space indicating a past collision, and it does not appear that the Earth and the Moon developed during the same time period. As for the capture theory, even scientist Isaac Asimov, well known for his works of fiction, wrote, "It's too big to have been captured by the Earth." The chances of such a capture having been effected, and the Moon then having taken up nearly circular orbit around our Earth, are too small to make such an eventuality credible. Asimov was right to consider the Moon's orbit. It is not only nearly a perfect circle, it is stationary, one side always facing the Earth, with only the slightest variation. As far as we know, it's the only natural satellite with such an orbit. This circular orbit is especially odd, considering that the Moon's centre of mass lies more than a mile closer to the Earth than its geometric centre. This fact alone should produce an unstable, wobbly orbit, much as a ball with its mass off-centre will not roll in a straight line. Additionally, almost all of the other satellites in our solar system orbit in the plane of their planet's equator. Not so the Moon, whose orbit lies strangely nearer the Earth's orbit around the Sun, or inclined to the Earth's ecliptic by more than 5 degrees. In July 1970, two Russian scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Shcherbakov, had an article published in the Soviet journal Sputnik entitled "Is the Moon the Creation of Intelligence?" They advanced the theory that the Moon is not a completely natural world, but a planetoid that was hollowed out eons ago in the far reaches of space, by intelligent beings possessing a technology far superior to ours. Huge machines were used to melt rock and form large cavities within the Moon, spewing the molten refuse onto the surface. Protected by a hull-like inner shell, plus a reconstructed outer shell of metallic rocky junk, this gigantic craft was steered through the cosmos and finally parked in orbit around the Earth. In their article, Vasin and Shcherbakov wrote, "Abandoning the traditional paths of common sense, we have plunged into what may at first sight seem to be unbridled and irresponsible fantasy. But the more minutely we go into all the information gathered by man about the Moon, the more we are convinced that there is not a single fact to rule out our supposition. As outrageous as the spaceship moon theory may first appear, consider how this model reconciles all of the mysteries of the Moon. It would explain why the Moon gives evidence of being much older than the Earth and perhaps even our solar system, and why there are 3 distinct layers within the Moon, with the densest materials in the outside layer, exactly as one would expect of the hull of a spacecraft. It could also explain why no sign of water has been found on the Moon's surface, yet there is evidence that it exists deep inside. To the argument between hot moon and cold moon, scientists, they are both right. The Moon originally was a cold world, which was transformed into a spacecraft by artificially heating and expelling vast quantities of its interior. This theory also could explain the seemingly contradictions over the question of a hollow moon. If the moon originally was a solid world which was artificially hollowed out, there would be evidence of both phases, exactly what we have with the current moon knowledge. The circular logic of modern science regarding the origin of the moon runs something like this. We know that extraterrestrials don't exist, but we do know that the moon exists and has been mentioned throughout human history. We humans did not create it or place it in Earth's orbit, so it must have been done by extraterrestrials. But since we are told they don't exist, we will simply call it an anomaly. Phobos, one of the two moons of Mars, has itself always been considered a rather mysterious object, as has its smaller twin, Deimos. Josef Shklovsky, a noted member of the Soviet Academy of Science and co-writer with the famous Dr. Carl Sagan of Intelligent Life in the Universe, once calculated from the estimated density of the Martian atmosphere and the peculiar acceleration of Phobos that the satellite must be hollow. Could Phobos be a hollowed-out space station of huge proportions? The question, as you will find out, is not so far from reality as you might first think. In July 1988, the Russians sent two unmanned satellite probes called Phobos 1 and Phobos 2 in the direction of Mars, with the primary intention of investigating the planet's mysterious moon, Phobos. The first probe, Phobos 1, was unfortunately lost en route 2 months earlier, reportedly because of a radio command error. Phobos 2 was also ultimately then lost in the most intriguing circumstances, but not before it had beamed back certain images and information from the planet Mars itself. Phobos 2 arrived safely at Mars in January 1989 and entered into orbit around Mars as the first step at its destination towards its ultimate goal, to transfer to an orbit that would make it fly almost in tandem with the Martian moon called Phobos, hence the spacecraft's name. All went well until the probe aligned itself with Phobos, the Martian moon. Then on the 28th of March 1989, the Soviet Mission Control Center acknowledged sudden communication problems with the spacecraft, and TASS, the official Soviet news agency, responded that Phobos 2 failed to communicate with Earth as scheduled after completing an operation yesterday around the Martian moon Phobos. Scientists at Mission Control have been unable to establish stable radio contact. What had caused the Phobos 2 spacecraft to be lost? The answer came about 3 months later. Pressed by their international participants in the Phobos missions to provide more definitive data, the Soviet authorities released the taped television transmission Phobos 2 sent in its last moments, except for the last frames, taken just seconds before the spacecraft fell silent. The television clip was shown by some TV stations in Europe and Canada as part of weekly diary programs, as a curiosity and not as a hot news item. The television sequence thus released focused on two anomalies. The first was a network of straight lines in the area of the Martian equator. Some of the lines were short, some longer, some thin, some wide enough to look like rectangular shapes embossed in the Martian surface. Arranged, narrow lines parallel to each other, the pattern covered an area of some 600 square kilometers, more than 230 square miles. The anomaly appeared to be far from a natural phenomenon. The television clip was accompanied by a live comment by Dr. John Becklake of the London Science Museum. He described the phenomenon as very puzzling because the pattern seen on the surface of Mars was photographed not with the spacecraft's optical camera, but with its infrared camera, a camera that takes pictures of objects using the heat they radiate, and not by the play of light and shadow on them. In other words, the pattern of parallel lines and rectangles covering an area of almost 250 square miles was a source of heat radiation. It is highly unlikely that a natural source of heat radiation, a geyser or a concentration of radioactive minerals under the surface, for example, would create such a perfect geometric pattern. When viewed over and over again, the pattern definitely looks artificial, but as for what it was, the scientist said, "I certainly don't know." According to Boris Belitsky, science correspondent for Radio Moscow, just before contact was lost with Phobos 2, several unusual images were radioed back to Earth, described by the Russian as quite remarkable features. A report taken from New Scientist of 8th of April 1989 describes the following. The features are either on the Martian surface or in the lower atmosphere. The features are between 20 and 25 kilometers wide and do not resemble any known geological formation. They are spindle-shaped and proving to be intriguing and puzzling. Since no coordinates for the precise location of this anomalous feature have been released publicly, it is impossible to judge its feature on the surface of Mars that can be seen in Mariner 9, frame 4209-75. It is also located in the equatorial area at longitude 186.4 and has been described as unusual indentations with radial arms protruding from a central hub, caused, according to NASA scientists, by the melting and collapse of permafrost layers. The design of the features bringing to mind the structure of a modern airport, with a circular hub from which the long structures housing the airplane gates radiate can be better visualized when the photograph is reversed, showing depressions as protrusions. A shadow across the surface of Mars. An unusual photo of a thin shadow across Mars was shown on the Russian television segment. Seen on the surface of Mars was a clearly defined dark shape that could indeed be described, as it was in the initial dispatch from Moscow, as a thin ellipse. It was certainly different from the shadow of Phobos, recorded 18 years earlier by Mariner 9. The latter cast a shadow that was a rounded ellipse and fuzzy at the edges, as would be cast by the uneven close-up view of Phobos, showing the grooved and cratered surface. The anomaly seen in the Phobos 2 transmission was a thin ellipse with very sharp rather than rounded points. The shape is known in the diamond trade as marquise, and the edges, rather than being fuzzy, stood out sharply against a kind of halo on the Martian surface. Dr. Becklake described it as something that is between the spacecraft and Mars, because we can see the Martian surface below it, and stressed that the object was seen both by the optical and the infrared heat-seeking camera. All these reasons explain why the Soviets have not suggested that the dark, thin ellipse might have been the shadow of the Moon. While the image was held on the screen, Dr. Becklake explained that it was taken as the spacecraft was aligning itself with Phobos, the Moon. As the last picture was halfway through, he said they, the Soviets, saw something which should not be there. The Soviets, he went on to state, have not yet released this last picture, and we won't speculate on what it shows. So what was it that collided or crashed into Phobos 2? Was the space probe shot out of space for seeing too much? What does the last secret frame show? In his careful words to Aviation Week and Space Technology, the chairman of the Soviet equivalent of NASA referred to that last frame, saying, "One image appears to include an odd-shaped object between the spacecraft and Mars." The highly secret photo was later given to the Western press by Colonel Dr. Marina Popovich, a Russian astronaut and pilot who has long been interested in UFOs. At a UFO conference in 1991, Popovich gave to certain investigators some interesting information that she smuggled out of the now ex-Soviet Union. Part of the information was what has been called the first ever leaked account of an alien mothership in the solar system. The last transmission from Phobos 2 was a photograph of a gigantic cylindrical spaceship, a huge, approximately 20 kilometers long, 1.5 kilometers diameter cigar-shaped mothership that was photographed on the 25th of March 1989 hanging or parked next to the Martian moon Phobos by the Soviet unmanned probe Phobos 2. After the last frame was radio transmitted back to Earth, the probe mysteriously disappeared. According to the Russians, it was destroyed, possibly knocked out with an energy pulse beam. The cigar-shaped craft in the penultimate frame, taken by Phobos 2, is apparently the object casting the oblong shadow on the surface of Mars in the earlier photo. Australian science writer Arian Crowley says that because of the convex cat's-eye shadow, which because the overhead solar inclination prevented shadow casting by Martian surface features, implies a shadow thrown on the surface by something in orbit beyond the orbit of Phobos 2 itself. The shadow spindle, or cigar-shaped, is inconsistent with any possible shadow cast by the moon Phobos, which is an irregular potato shape. One needs little imagination to postulate a giant hovering cigar-shaped mothercraft similar to those documented down the years by UFO investigators. Another Phobos picture, released on Canadian TV, presents an infrared scan radiometer image of the Martian surface that showed clearly defined rectangular areas. These were interconnected, with a set of perfectly straight channels much resembling a city block. There were no corresponding surface features taken by regular cameras. This suggests the heat signature of what may be a set of underground caverns and channels that are just too geometrically regular to be formed naturally. According to Dr. John Becklake of the London Science Museum, the city light pattern is 60 kilometres wide and could easily be mistaken for an aerial view of Los Angeles.
A number of well-known NASA astronauts, including Edgar D. Mitchell, lunar module pilot of the Apollo 14 lunar landing mission, and Gordon Cooper, who was part of the Mercury program which ran from 1958 to 1963, claim to have seen strange spacecraft and even aliens during their missions. But there have also been many strange stories told by other, less well-known astronauts, which are just as interesting. These include Donald Kent Deke Slayton, Soviet cosmonaut Pavel Popovich, and NASA astronaut Frank Borman. Why have so many astronauts on so many different occasions witnessed strange things in the sky? Astronauts and UFOs. Astronauts have been reporting strange flying objects since the beginning of manned space exploration. Indeed, there is a long, impressive list of US and Soviet astronauts who have reported seeing UFOs during missions or even in their civilian lives. The list includes Major Gordon Cooper, Ed White, James McDivitt, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, James Lovell, Frank Borman, and Pavel Popovich. What these men saw, and sometimes even photographed, varies from fuzzy lights and shapes in the sky to extraterrestrial artifacts and even aliens themselves. Some of the most interesting of the lesser-known UFO accounts comes from Pavel Popovich, Donald Deke Slayton, and Frank Borman. Due to the fact that astronauts are educated and trained well enough to be able to tell the difference between man-made objects, natural phenomena, and something genuinely unidentified, their testimonies are held in high regard by UFO researchers. Along with military personnel, pilots, and air traffic controllers, astronauts are widely regarded to be trained observers with higher levels of visual identification and recall. Pavel Popovich. Pavel Popovich was a Soviet cosmonaut, the fourth cosmonaut in space and the sixth person in orbit. Popovich piloted the Vostok 4 spacecraft, launched on the 12th of August 1962, and was the commander of the Soyuz 14 mission from the 3rd to the 19th of July 1974. Later, Popovich became a UFO researcher for the Soviet government. The primary source for his sighting is the UFO documentary Out of the Blue, which gave the following account of Popovich's sighting in his own words. It occurred when he was flying home from Washington, D.C. with a delegation of scientists. For some reason, I was compelled to look out of the plane's window. I looked, and my eyes grew real big. I saw next to us, about 1.5 kilometers away, and about 1,000 meters higher, there is a flying object. Its shape is the perfect triangle. It was white, a very bright white. I'm a pilot, a fighter pilot, and I know many different types of flying crafts. It was like nothing I've ever seen. The pilots contacted ground control. Ground control did not detect anything on radar, even though the object could be seen by all occupants of the plane. It traveled a parallel course, and its speed, if we were traveling approximately 950 to 1,000 kilometers an hour, it was traveling at about 1,500 kilometers per hour, because it passed us rather quickly. In about 30 or 40 seconds, it passed by and overtook us. And that's all, and no academic or anybody could say what the object was.
The last thing I got from the recovery guys would be arrival at Ellington at 8 o'clock Sunday morning. Now, the times before that, Roy, I'm not too clear on, but in rough numbers, we'll keep them on the carrier overnight.
Donald Kent Deke Slayton. Deke Slayton was a United States Air Force pilot, aeronautical engineer, and test pilot who was selected as one of the original NASA Mercury 7 astronauts. However, he was not able to join that program due to a heart condition. Indeed, he was grounded for years, decades, before being approved for the Apollo-Soyuz test project, the first joint mission with the Soviet Union, which launched into space on the 15th of July 1975.
Apollo Houston, I got 2 messages for you. Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys. Have fun.
After Apollo-Soyuz, Slayton worked as a manager for the Enterprise shuttle prototype approach and landing tests, which ended late in 1977. He afterwards managed NASA's orbital flight training program before retiring in February 1982. In his 1995 autobiography, Deke, an autobiography, Slayton includes a fascinating encounter with a strange aerial craft in 1951. It was when I was doing a maintenance test flight like this that I had my one and only encounter with an unidentified flying object. I was up about the middle of one afternoon, a nice sunny day. I'd just come out of a spin at around 10,000 feet over the Mississippi River near Prescott. I was heading back to Holman Field when all of a sudden I saw this white object about my altitude at 1 o'clock. I didn't think anything about it. My first thought was it looked like a kite. But logic said nobody's flying a kite at this altitude, so I started kind of watching to see what it was. The closer Slayton got to the object, the more he thought it looked like a weather balloon, about 3 feet in diameter. However, he was intrigued and, having plenty of gas in the tank, decided to get a closer look. I headed straight at it. All of a sudden, it didn't look like a balloon anymore. It looked like a disc on edge. I thought, that's strange. Then I realized I was closing in on it. A P-51 at that time would cruise at 280 miles an hour, but this thing just kept going and climbing at the same time at about a 45-degree climb. I kept trying to follow it, but he just left me behind and flat disappeared. I wondered what that was, but I never saw it again. I turned around, headed back and landed, and didn't tell anybody about it for 2 days. I was afraid that they'd think I'd lost my mind. A couple of days later, Slayton told his boss, a full colonel, about the incident. He told Slayton to report the sighting to intelligence, which he did. During the interview, the officers from intelligence took notes and at the end told him, "Just for your information, the day you saw this object, a local company was flying high-altitude research balloons. They had a light airplane tracking it and a station wagon on the ground. Both observers were watching this balloon and had seen this object come up beside this balloon. The object appeared to hover, and then it took off like hell. The guys on the ground tracked it with a theodolite, and they'd computed the speed at 4,000 miles an hour." Frank Borman. Frank Borman, a retired U.S. astronaut who was commander of the Apollo 8 mission in December 1968, which made the first crewed flight around the moon, thus making the crew the first men to leave Earth's gravity and journey to the moon. Before flying on Apollo, Borman had set a spaceflight endurance record on Gemini 7, a 1965 manned spaceflight in NASA's Gemini program. The crew of Frank F. Borman II and James A. Lovell Jr. spent nearly 14 days in space, making a total of 206 orbits. In July 1970, Borman resigned from NASA and became a company executive of Eastern Airlines. Borman's UFO sighting came in December 1965, while he was in orbit during the Gemini 7 mission. The following text comes from the Gemini 7 mission transcript. Borman: Gemini 7 here, Houston, how do you read? Capcom: loud and clear, 7, go ahead. Borman: I have a bogey at 10 o'clock high. Capcom: this is Houston. Say again, 7? Borman: said we have a bogey at 10 o'clock high. Capcom: roger. Capcom: Gemini 7, is that the booster or is it an actual sighting? Borman: nothing. Capcom: say again, 7? Borman: said we have several looks like actual sighting. Capcom: do you have any more information, estimated distance or size? Borman: we also have the booster in sight. Capcom, understand you also have the booster in sight, roger? Borman, there are very many, looks like hundreds of little particles going by from left, out about 3 or 4 miles. Capcom, understand you have many small particles going by on the left, at what distance? Borman, looks like. Capcom, roger, understand they're about 3 or 4 miles away. Borman, they're past now, they're in a polar orbit. Capcom, roger, and understand they were about 3 to 4 miles away? Borman, that's what it appeared like, or further. Capcom, roger. Capcom, Gemini 7 Houston, were these particles in addition to the booster and the bogey at 10 o'clock high? Borman, Houston, this is 7. Capcom, go ahead. Borman, I have the booster on my side and the brilliant body of the sun against a black background with billions of particles around it. Capcom, roger, what direction is it from you? Borman, it's about 2 o'clock position. Capcom, does that mean it's ahead of you? Borman, it's ahead of us at 2 o'clock and it's slowly tumbling. Capcom, roger. Judging by this small sample of UFO sightings made by lesser-known astronauts, it follows that there must be a huge amount of fascinating and unknown UFO material relating to astronauts waiting to be recovered from the archives of NASA